At 3:30 p.m. on the 15th of February 1997, 13-year-old Billie Jo Jenkins was bludgeoned to death on the patio at the back of her foster home in Hastings, East Sussex, UK. The murder weapon was an 18-inch tent peg which belonged to the family and had been left behind at the scene. Her foster father, Sean Jenkins, was convicted of her murder based on forensic evidence, but the source of the blood found on him was called into question, which gave grounds for a retrial. Sean Jenkins was ultimately acquitted of the murder of his foster daughter, purely due to the jury not being able to come to a conclusion after 2 retrials. However, some still believe Sean killed Billie Jo, and questions about her murder remain unanswered. Hey there, little berries and newberries, Airy Berry here. Welcome if you are new, welcome back if you are not. Before exploring the case of the Billie Jo Jenkins murder, I wish to thank both the subscribers, my little berries, and the channel members, the newberries, who are Alf, Alison Hempseed, Candy Ray, and Reality Check, Jules. If you wish to become a member of Airy Berry True Crime, please click the join button below, the link above or in the description. It costs £2.99 a month, whatever that is in your currency, and for that you receive a shout out like I've just done, but also early access to the videos. So my newberries would have seen this video already, or they would have had access to it anyway. If you want to have those perks, then by all means join, but if you don't and just want to come back and watch the content, you can just click subscribe. It's free to do. Alternatively, if you would like to have the perks but don't want to give your money to YouTube, I have just launched a Patreon, which is the same amount of money, £2.99 a month, and the link for that is also below in the description. The trigger warnings for this case are murder with a blunt instrument, troubled childhood and foster care, and allegations of parental and spousal abuse. If these are triggering for you, please click off or watch with caution. The following content has been made with no intended disrespect to anyone involved in the case. What I'm about to report is what I've researched online based on information which is in the public domain, and I will welcome corrections if they are required. Please provide sources should you wish to provide corrections. I would like to recommend this video by criminal profiler Pat Brown, who analysed this case a couple of years back. She reviewed the evidence and has proposed a possible scenario that explains the forensic and circumstantial evidence. I aim to not give my opinions on this channel, but sometimes I feel it necessary to purport a theory, but I'm not qualified really to do that. So I'd like to redirect you to Pat Brown's video where she will give you an in-depth review of the evidence as opposed to telling the story, and her explanation is pretty compelling, so if you'd rather watch her video, go for it. Billie Jo Margaret Jenkins was born in East London on the 29th of March 1983 to parents Debbie and Bill Jenkins, the latter being the one after whom she was named. Bill Jenkins was not heavily present in Billie Jo's life due to him being in prison at various points, and it was actually in prison that Debbie and Bill actually met. He moved in with Debbie not long after he was released from prison, and she very quickly fell pregnant with Billie Jo. She married Bill just a few weeks after Billie Jo was born. Debbie Jenkins herself went to prison for credit card fraud when Billie Jo was very young. This meant that Billie Jo and her siblings, I believe she had about 5 siblings, had to be cared for by Debbie's mother. After being released from prison, Debbie did try and regain custody of her children, but she found it very hard indeed to get a job and a suitable home in which her and her kids could live safely. Unfortunately, she couldn't do this, so Billie Jo and her siblings were placed into foster care when Billie Jo was 8 years of age. At the age of 9, Billie Jo and one of her half-brothers, who was around 15 or 16 years old at the time, were taken in by Sean and Lois Jenkins after they'd seen an advert in the local paper. Coincidentally, they had the same name as Billie Jo. Before this, Billie Jo and her half-brother had been fostered by a family in Ilford who couldn't keep them any longer. So in June 1992, Sean and Lois Jenkins took in Billie Jo and her half-brother. But after a few days or a week or two, Billie Jo's brother was taken out of the home and was placed into a children's home. Some sources say that this was because Sean and Lois Jenkins didn't want to keep him, but some say he was taken away against their will and Sean went to visit him regularly. Before being placed into foster care though, Billie Jo had had a very troubled childhood and she'd exhibited behaviour issues since she was very small, such as attempting to harm people. This shows that Billie Jo experienced some trauma that manifested in such ways. The family in Ilford was struggling so hard with Billie Joe and her half-brother's behaviour that the placement with Sean and Lois Jenkins was arranged out of desperation at first and was intended to be temporary. The alternative was to send the two children to a London children's home, which all parties were keen to avoid, so Billie Joe and her half-brother were taken to Sean and Lois. The half-brother didn't last very long there, but Billie remained with the Jenkins family. Sean and Lois Jenkins already had 4 biological daughters. At the time of this incident in 1997, Maya was 7, Esther was 8, Charlotte, or Lottie as she was known, was 10, and Annie was 12. According to Sean Jenkins, it was Lois who expressed a desire to foster children, not Sean. This was due to Lois's parents fostering children when she was younger. She had also become a social worker. They'd had 4 children, and I believe Lois's first foster sibling came in when she was one of 4 biological children. So when they reached that point, they decided to foster, and Sean gave his wife his, quote, full support. Billie Joe's first couple of years with the Jenkins were difficult. She had a troubled early life, as previously mentioned, and it's often common with foster children that their previous circumstances, either with natural or other foster families, have been less than ideal or downright abusive. Some foster families do not always move the child from a bad situation to one in which is better. Sometimes they go from bad to bad or even worse. Billie Joe showed some aggressive behaviour in the first couple of years. One time she pulled all the heads off one of her foster sister's dolls. Her behaviour in school in London was so bad that she was on the cusp of being expelled. However, as she grew up and entered her pre-teens, Billie Joe calmed down somewhat. Steps were taken to formally adopt her, but at the time of her death, she was still technically a foster daughter to Sean and Lois Jenkins. Although Billie Joe's behaviour did calm down, she maintained a very loud, bubbly, feisty and headstrong personality. Sean Jenkins told Sir Trevor MacDonald that Billie Joe was lovely and had many fond memories of her with the family. Before even fostering Billie Joe, Sean Jenkins had applied for a job as the deputy head teacher at the William Parker School in Hastings. Before that, they lived in London. His application was successful, and just a few weeks after Billie Joe joined the family, they moved from London to Hastings. Sean said in his book that the move from London to Hastings was idyllic for Billie. She spent a lot of time on the beach and she thrived while she was there. Apparently, when saying to Billie, look, we're going to move to Hastings, is this okay with you? She said she was very, very keen to move, to have a nice fresh start in her life. Billie Joe attended Helenswood School and did better there than she did in London. She showed great passion and great promise for singing, dancing and drama. She loved acting in school plays and wanted to become an actress. She was popular, and her friends said she was rather loud and not afraid to say what she thought and would stand up for herself. One friend said to Channel 5 that Billie Joe was, quote, just so much fun, such a performer and a good friend. One neighbour in Hastings said that Billie Joe was very well spoken, with excellent manners, and so it seemed to the outside world that she was indeed thriving with this new family and environment. But as is the case with many families, appearances can be deceiving. In 1997, Sean and Lois Jenkins and their 4 biological daughters and Billie Joe lived at number 48 Lower Park Road in Hastings, which was a large suburban house on one of the roads that circled the rather beautiful Alexandra Park. The very day they moved there, the family went into Alexandra Park just to have a little break from moving, and while they were there, the first day they were there, the house was broken into. Only the TV was stolen, but still, not a good start. Number 48 Lower Park Road was semi-detached, and the attached house next door was vacant, with several people squatting at certain points. The Jenkins had voiced concerns about the people occupying the vacant property. They were anxious over their security, and indeed, their back patio doors had been smashed in an apparent attempted burglary, leading them to have to purchase replacement patio doors. The Jenkins had also asked a friend to install security lights at the back and front of the house. Several incidents were reported to the police, but with apparently no resolution. The home was situated behind a small stone perimeter and up a short flight of steps with an embanked lawn to the right. The house had access to the back garden via a gate on the left-hand side, which opened up out towards the front of the house, and the front door of the property was situated also on the left-hand side, very close to the gate. However, this gate did not have a working lock. Sean Jenkins was wary of people squatting next door, and he was concerned that someone may have been getting into the back of the house via the side gate. Despite being concerned for their safety and security of the house and family, having had the patio doors replaced and lights installed, not even a simple lock had been installed on the side gate. So what Sean Jenkins would do is he would move a heavy bag of peat and wedge it up against the gate to basically see whether or not it's an animal or a person, because an animal wouldn't be able to move a heavy bag of peat like that. The glass-paned patio doors were to the back of the property and led to the dining room of the house. When entering the house from the front door, which is at the side of it, the dining room was on the left and not visible to anyone from the outside. It was the 15th of February in 1997, a Saturday, and the now 13-year-old Billie Jo told Lois that she wanted to go into town and buy herself a pair of trainers. But Lois had told Billie Jo that there were chores to be done at home, so she couldn't go. After having lunch, Lois Jenkins and the two younger daughters, Esther and Maya, went out shopping. 10-year-old Lottie had a clarinet lesson at 2 o'clock that day and had been taken there earlier by Lois. So at home in the early afternoon of that day, there was Sean, Annie and Billie Jo. Billie Jo was tasked with painting the patio doors, which were still bare after their replacement. Sean purchased paint and a brush the day before so that the patio doors could be painted. Billie Jo was playing music while she was painting and had apparently refused to turn it down, which upset Sean. He instructed her how to paint the doors and was emphatic that Billie Jo did not get paint on the glass nor on the floor. However, he had not taken any steps to protect the floor. He hadn't laid any plastic sheeting, he hadn't put tape on the glass. He just expected her, a 13-year-old girl, to paint perfectly just by being told. He left her to it and then took 12-year-old Annie outside with 2 buckets of water to wash one of the family cars, which was an Opel. Annie had also cleared out a utility closet. She'd taken some things out to the garden. So now she was washing the Opel, which was one of the family cars. Sean also had a MG convertible. When Sean came back into the house, he saw that Billie Jo was painting the inside of the doors rather than the outside as he had instructed. Sean said in his book that her painting was, quote, a mess. Despite what he told her, paint was on the floor and on the glass. Sean then went to fetch a blanket and a bin liner, placing the blanket inside the bin liner, probably so as not to get paint on the blanket, put it on the floor for Billie Jo to kneel or sit on because she was squatting in an uncomfortable way and the tiles wouldn't have been very comfortable to sit on. He was frustrated with how Billie Jo was painting, so he once again showed her how to paint. According to his book, this was before he and Annie had left to collect Lottie from her clarinet lesson. He said that 13-year-old Billie Jo at this point climbed onto his back as he was squatting. It's unclear why she would do this, but Sean then said after Billie Jo got off him, "Am I doing a good job?" And he hugged her, assuring her, "Yes, you're doing a good job." He said that she wasn't doing a good job a few minutes before. Lottie's clarinet lesson was due to finish at 3 o'clock. At 5 to 3 that day, Sean took Annie, not Billie Jo, he left her behind to paint, and went to collect Lottie from her clarinet lesson, so I assume that Annie had finished washing the Opel. They drove off in Sean's MG. Sean also dropped off a friend of Lottie's called Ellen back to her home, and it was noted in the court documents that that particular time of Ellen's arrival at home was between 3:15 and 3:20. Sean then drove home with Annie and Lottie, and this drive would have taken between 4 and 5 minutes. So the three of them would have arrived back at 48 Lower Park Road between 3:20 and 3:25. According to the appeal court documents, Lottie, quote, rushed upstairs to put away her clarinet, and she was then going to wash the MG. Annie had earlier that day cleared out the utility closet, as I mentioned before, and she'd washed the Opel, and she was going to take over the painting from Billie Jo, so it looked like they were just going to do a rotation, so you paint half, I'll paint the other half. Shortly after arriving home from picking up Lottie, Sean decided he needed to get some white spirit, which is paint thinner, it's a UK name for paint thinner, to clean off the paint from the tiles and the glass, because this is oil-based paint, not emulsion, so you can't get it off with soap and water. Taking Annie and Lottie with him, he left the house with them to get the white spirit. They left in Sean's MG convertible. They drove to Doolittle, which was about a mile from the house. However, when he arrived and had just entered the store, Sean discovered he forgot his wallet and returned home with the girl saying, Well, I tried. Annie and Lottie went into the house first, with Sean following. It was estimated that this was around 3:35, or 10 or 15 minutes since they set off for Do It All. The girls entered the dining room expecting to see their foster sister there still painting. What greeted Annie and Lottie was Billie Joe lying on the patio floor, covered in blood. One of the girls cried out for Sean, saying, "Billy's been hurt." Sean ushered the girls out of the room and into the playroom. After escorting Annie and Lottie out of the dining room into the playroom, Sean said he went up to Billie Joe. He whispered to her and put his hand on her shoulder, seeing that her head was limp. The Jenkins had 2 landlines in the house, and at that point, one of the phones started ringing. Sean picked it up and slammed it down several times, and at 3:38 p.m, Sean called 999, and what appears to be an edited down version of the call is available online. For copyright reasons, I can't play the call, but I will read to you what was said. Sean, 48 Lower Park Road. Operator, Lower Park Road? Sean, Lower Park Road, Hastings, and it is an emergency. Operator, and what's happened there? Sean, I don't know. My daughter's fallen or she's got head injuries. There's blood everywhere. Operator, what, she's banged her head and is bleeding from the head? Sean, yes, and well, I don't know. There appears to be a cut here, and he seems to say, well, I don't know, she's, and then it immediately cuts to, there's blood everywhere. On her head, she's lying on the floor. So there may well have been an edit at that point in the call. Operator, and can I take your name, sir? Sean, Sean Jenkins. Operator, okay, so she's unconscious. Is she breathing all right? Sean, I don't know. I haven't looked. Operator, right, okay, and did this happen while you were out the house then? Sean, yes, it did. I just this minute got back. Operator, all right, so you don't know how long ago it would have. Sean, I don't know how. Well, in the last I don't know, half an hour, 3/4 of an hour? As he waited for the ambulance to arrive, Sean called a neighbour called Denise, who came running over as soon as she got the call, and she arrived before the paramedics did. Denise later described what she saw. Billie Joe was lying on her front, with her head turned to the right, looking towards the garden. Under her head was a black bin liner, which Sean confirmed he had taken out to the patio earlier that day with a blanket so Billie Joe could sit on it or kneel. The court documents say, quote, Billie Joe was lying completely flat with the left side of her face on the floor on a black bin liner, which the appellant had earlier provided, with a rug inside for her to kneel or sit on. There are some pictures online with Billie Joe's body blurred out, but you can see a bin liner which is sort of billowed and sort of looked like it had been sort of like crudely put on the floor, and there is something which looks like a blanket on the floor or a rag, but it's unclear as to whether the blanket was still inside the bin liner. Denise also observed that Billie Joe's legs were aligned together in a rather unusual way. It was Billie Joe's head that caught Denise's attention most of all. Like Sean, she noticed that Billie Joe's head was badly injured, and she described the poor girl's head as being, quote, shattered. Blood and brains were splattered all over the bin liner. Denise noticed that part of the bin liner was lodged very deeply inside Billie Joe's left nostril. She pulled it out and she had to tug it quite hard, and it was quite far wedged inside. It took some effort, and then Denise saw that the bin liner had actually been bleeding from her nose, because as she pulled it out, blood flowed from her nose. It's unclear though whether this was a torn off section of the bin liner which itself had been pushed up high into the nostril, or whether just part of the bin still attached was in her nostril. That I would like to find out. Denise said that the girl's right hand was very close to her face, but also saw that the right hand side of Billie Joe's face, the one that was exposed, was completely untouched. Although Billie Joe was still warm, there was no sign of life. Denise didn't want to touch Billie given that her head was so badly damaged. She implored Sean to call 999 again, which he did at 3:46 p.m. This call I haven't been able to find online nor a transcript, but the court documents say that Sean told the operator in this call that he had placed Billie Joe in the recovery position, but he hadn't. He did say he went back to her after the call and tried to pull her towards him to cradle her, and her body made a squelching guttural sound. Sean had blood on his hands from this and tried to shake the blood off, and later wash the blood off his hands. Sean had allegedly told a neighbour that he had tried to revive Billie Joe, but he hadn't. When the ambulance arrived, they found Billie Joe still lying on her front and was sadly beyond saving. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She'd been struck a total of 5 times. The item with which this horrific murder was carried out was still at the scene, an 18-inch iron tent peg weighing just under a kilo, one of a set of 6 that belonged to the family and had been placed on the coal bunker in the garden earlier that day by Annie. I haven't been able to find out the location of this coal bunker, but apparently it was further away from Billie Joe's place where she was painting than the garden table, which had other tools on it, and this was another point that was later brought up. The girls had been tasked with doing chores that day to earn extra pocket money, so Annie had cleared out the utility closet, Billie Joe was painting the doors, Annie had washed the car. That's why it was out there, so it wasn't a case of it had been taken from another place of the home or brought there by someone else. When they arrived at 40 at Lower Park Road, the ambulance staff said that they had actually just drove a few meters beyond the house where they stopped, and they saw that Sean Jenkins was outside the home. He was sitting in his MG. This seems strange considering that his foster daughter lay badly injured on the patio floor. Sean later told police that he was in his MG as he needed to put the roof up, owing to the weather turning and it was going to rain. But the police said that this was absolute rubbish because the convertible would not need someone to sit in the car to put the roof on it. Sean then changed his story and said he was in shock and he really didn't know why he went outside to sit in the MG. Why be out there when his foster daughter lay in the home whom he felt was still alive? He had 2 other young girls in the home. Was he just going to leave them in the playroom? Why worry about the car? Let it flood. You can replace a car, but you can't replace a daughter. At 4:06 p.m, detectives arrived after Billie Joe had been declared deceased by the attending paramedics. DC Ann Capon arrived and noticed how quiet the house was, and she thought maybe she was at the wrong house until Sean came down the stairs and directed her to the dining room where Billie Joe was. DC Capon spoke with Denise, who mentioned to her about the plastic in Billie Joe's nose. Denise had also got down on the floor in the hallway of the home to show DC Capon how Billie Joe was lying when she found her, because she probably had been moved by the paramedics. There was blood spatter across the patio doors at a low level, small spots of blood and one small pool on the floor. Sean told police that the side gate, which opened towards the front of the house, had been closed with a bag of peat, had been placed there to keep it closed. However, the gate was open when the police arrived. Sean confirmed nobody from his family had been through that gate since he left for the White Spirit. They'd used the front entrance of the home, not the gate. Within the hour, Sean, Annie and Lottie were being interviewed by the police. Lois, Esther and Maya were informed as soon as they arrived home as to what happened. Sean told the police that the girls were doing chores to earn extra pocket money. Annie cleared out the store cupboard, she washed the car, Billie Joe was painting the patio doors. Annie had taken a box of tent pegs and placed them on the coal bunker in the garden. Sean had filled 2 buckets of water for Annie to wash the opal, and he took Annie with him when he headed off at 2:55 p.m. that day to pick up Lottie. He had left Billie Joe painting, but had already observed Billie Joe's, quote, messy painting and knew he had to get some White Spirit to clean the tiles. He told police that when he arrived home, he and Annie stayed outside the house as Lottie, quote, rushed to put her clarinet in her bedroom. Then Sean and the 2 girls had left the house once again in his MG to go to Do It All. To get to Do It All, Sean would need to take a left from outside his home and go straight to the store. Sean didn't do this. The MG was parked on the right-hand side of the road, and to go left, he'd have to do a 3-point turn. He said it was too dangerous, and he would normally just drive the way the car was facing. This meant he was heading away from Do It All, but made 2 left turns to head in the right direction. He had driven down Lower Park Road, turned into Belthume Way, turned left at the roundabout, and driven up St. Helens Road. Then, instead of driving onward, Sean decided to head home by taking another left turn into Dortrick Way, and yet another back into Lower Park Road. So he had actually circumnavigated Alexandra Park. Why? Sean said the reason for this was because during the 2-minute drive before turning to Dortrick Way, he decided not to go to Do It All after all and said it was getting late and there was no point. However, he had promised Annie that she could take over the painting, and she was apparently very upset that they'd return home and that she couldn't carry on painting because they needed the White Spirit. He asked her, "How desperate are you to paint?" Annie said, "Very desperate. according to Sean. So Sean decided to keep going, so he drove past the house, circled the park once again, this time not taking a left into Dortrick Way, and he went to do it all. Sean got out of the car and went into the store, but just before entering the store, he realised he'd forgotten his wallet. He didn't have enough in his pockets, the glove compartment or anywhere. Neither Annie nor Lottie had any money on them, so they couldn't get the white spirit. So the three of them returned home, and this was when they found Billy Joe bludgeoned to death. The police questioned Sean as to why he took such a circuitous route, why he didn't do a three-point turn. He repeated his story, then changed his story about what he did when he returned home after picking up Lottie and before going to do it all. He firstly said that Lottie rushed in, put the claret in a bedroom, and then she rushed out and joined Sean and Annie at the car. Then he said that he did actually go up to the front door. He didn't stay with his car. And then he changed his story once again and said that he went into the house not far, just looked in the mirror, but did not go further in. Sean Jenkins said that he did not personally see nor speak with Billy Joe when Lottie was putting away her clarinet. He did, however, say that he heard Annie speak to Billy Joe as they were waiting for Lottie to come down. Annie at first backed up her father's story that they were both outside waiting for Lottie, but then she also said she went inside. She said that Billy Joe had said something, quote, snidey to her before they went back to the MG. Sean didn't say to Billy Joe that they were going straight out. Not, we're nipping out for 5 minutes, won't be long. Lottie and Annie, they went back to the MG and waited for their father. Their father was still in the house, and when they were asked how long, they said, quote, a couple of minutes. 2 minutes, 1 minute, so they couldn't be certain about the length of time. He then locked the door and then met them at the car. Sean was absolutely certain that the gate was shut when they left, and the daughters also said that it was shut. Several statements were taken at several times from all three of the key witnesses, and the stories changed so much and were so contradictory that there was nothing that could be completely defined by what they said. It was speculated that the girls had been coached, convinced, or told this is what happened, so their memories of that day weren't completely clear. A public appeal was made by Sean and Lois, in which Sean said, as a family, we are totally devastated. We do not understand why our daughter has been murdered or what the motive could possibly be. Lois expressed her concern over the vacant home next to theirs and a series of incidents which had been reported to the police. Not long into the investigation, the police had their first suspect. A man had been seen in Alexandra Park on that day who had a red birthmark on his face, so he was quite distinctive. He was seen holding a bag with a French stick, and many people placed him in the park some distance from 48 Lower Park Road at the time the police believed that the murder took place. He was seen at one point leaving a property and moving in the direction of 48 Lower Park Road. This man was arrested, and it was found that he had pieces of plastic. Now, I don't know if they were just solid pieces of plastic trays or sheets or bin liners or bags or whatever they were in his clothing and on his person, and that was interesting because of the bin liner that was wedged really deeply inside Billy Joe's nose. But that was a bin liner that was already there, supplied by Sean, not by this man. This man, unfortunately, they couldn't interview him because he had severe mental health issues, and the police didn't feel that they could trust what he was saying, so they couldn't interview him. But many people said that he was in the park on a specific bench quite away from 48 Lower Park Road, so they didn't believe that he could have gone to the house, killed Billy, left the property leaving no blood trail. That's another thing, there was no blood trail. Even though when they arrested him, it was several days later, he could have washed and laundered his clothes, they still had nothing really to tie him to the murder, so he was eventually released. The only way that a perpetrator could have accessed the back of that home is through that side gate, or if they had gone through the side gate of the adjoining property and climbed over the fence, or climbed over the fence from the other side. But there was no sign of disruption, there was no sign of blood trail leaving the property in any avenue. Let's not forget, Sean locked the front door. The girl said that he locked the front door, but again, not 100% sure. The amount of hits to Billy Joe's head, the back spatter and spray, it would have got all over the perpetrator. There's no way they wouldn't have left without dripping a bit of blood or had some blood on their person that somebody would have noticed. There was no sign of a break-in as the gate had no lock and was only kept closed due to the bag of peat, but no witnesses stated that they saw anyone other than the family entering or leaving the property. Also, there's no way of knowing whether or not there would have been somebody at home unless people had been staking out the property and ticking off everybody who lived in the home that had left. That would have left Billy Joe. So they would have gone through the gate, been surprised by Billy Joe. What's the most practical thing someone should do? Run. But why why bludgeon her to death? If it was an intruder, they hadn't brought a weapon with them. They had used something that was there already in the garden. Rather than run away or just punch Billie Joe or push her down and then run away, they grabbed a tent peg and smacked her over the head repeatedly and then left. There was no sign of any theft at the property or anyone had been through anything at the property. So what was the reason for someone going in there, just going there, bludgeoning her and then running away? This was also odd to the police because the tent peg was not on the table right next to Billie Joe where she was killed. It was on the coal bunker. Now, I've not been able to find out where the coal bunker was, but according to some sources, the coal bunker was further away from Billie Joe than the table, and the table had other tools on it. So why would they collect the tent peg? There were screwdrivers and I believe maybe even a hammer on the table that could have been used to easily subdue or kill Billie Joe. If someone had indeed intended to rob the place, they had not taken anything. There was no sign that they'd even entered the house. If they had killed Billie Joe after intending to burgle the home, they did not take this opportunity. An autopsy confirmed that Billie Joe did indeed receive 5 blows to the left side of her head, which smashed her skull, causing her to receive fatal injuries. The pathologist said she would have died either instantaneously or within a few minutes of the attack. The blows being on the left-hand side of her head showed that whoever it was, if she was facing them, was right-handed. The first blow would have knocked her to the floor, rendering her unconscious given how heavy the item was. Quite a bit of the spatter was at a very low level, so she would have been low to the ground when the hits to the head that would have caused that spatter would have taken place. The autopsy and examination of her clothing and the scene confirmed there was no sexual assault. She was a virgin and had not had her clothes ripped, nor was there any attempt to do so. Therefore, a sexual motive could be ruled out. In terms of the timing, Sean Jenkins told dispatchers that he had been out of the house between half an hour to 45 minutes, which is what the police were initially told. Before, Sean clarified that he had gone home after going to collect Lottie and before going back out to get the white spirit. So what was initially thought to be a window of opportunity of 45 minutes was narrowed down to just 10 minutes from when he left the house with Lottie and Annie to go to do it all and when they arrived home, by which point the alleged perpetrator had fled the scene unnoticed. With regard to the clothing, it was thought that any items of clothing of the occupants of the house may contain evidence. So all items were seized, including those of Denise and paramedics who attended the scene. It was thought that the person who bludgeoned Billie Joe would have large droplets of spatter on them. None of the clothing had expected spatter on them. However, Sean Jenkins' clothing revealed something interesting. His fleece jacket, trousers, and shoes did have blood on them, but not a lot. There were 158 spots of blood on his clothing that were not visible to the naked eye. One expert described the 158 individual spots as amounting to less than a pinprick if all were collected together. This was referred to blood spatter analysts, who concluded that this blood, given the pattern, spread, and minute droplets, was typical of someone close to her when she was being struck. Therefore, it was consistent with the wearer of Sean Jenkins' clothing being the killer. Upon confirming this information with the experts, the police arrested Sean Jenkins at his home a couple of weeks later. In the Channel 5 documentary, the police said that Lois was very supportive of her husband and very loyal to him, but it's common practice for the police to give all the information they have to the family members of the victim. The police were therefore obliged to tell Lois, "We have evidence that shows that your husband was the murderer of Billie Joe." Lois apparently at first was skeptical, but then accepted the evidence. Once it was confirmed that Sean had indeed been charged, Lois revealed something else. Sean was an abusive and controlling husband. He had physically harmed her in the past, such as busting her eardrum, and he had used rulers and slippers to discipline their daughters. Maya, Esther, Annie, and Lottie also backed up their mother's claims, and also their close friend Peter Gamester told police that on one occasion when he'd holidayed with the Jenkins in France, Billie Joe had sprained her ankle, and Sean thought that Billie had done this on purpose to gain sympathy. He had sent Billie Joe to bed, and unbeknownst to Sean, Peter Gamester had been on the landing of the home in France when he saw Sean in the bedroom with Billie Joe, and he saw Sean repeatedly kicking Billie Joe's ankle. Sean didn't deny that he sometimes used implements to hit his children, but denied that he was abusive, and he said to Sir Trevor MacDonald several years later that he was, quote, a good husband and a good father. The allegations of abuse were not admissible as evidence, and due to the daughters providing conflicting evidence as to what happened on the day, the prosecution decided not to use them as witnesses. Sean blamed the police for turning Lois against him, denying the abuse allegations by Lois. He felt that the police had fitted him up and brainwashed Lois, which she strongly refuted. One of the police officers was interviewed for a Channel 5 documentary, and he said something very interesting about Sean. He said that Sean was like a pendulum. He's very eerily calm and collected, not showing much emotion. If you watch the press conference that took place in 1997, you can see how calm he is. But this is because Sean was a man who was either in full control of himself completely or had lost control. He was at one side being held in a position defying the laws of physics due to him having such control, and was able to keep himself there. But once he lost control, he would swing right to the end. That is what they believe happened here, that this was a case of Sean Jenkins losing his cool with Billie and bludgeoning her out of rage and anger. After being arrested, Sean Jenkins was indeed charged but released on bail after saying to the police something that he had mentioned before, but he emphasized this, that when he went up to Billie Joe as she laid on the patio, he said he saw a bubble of blood forming in her nose, on her right nostril, so not where the bin liner was, but the other nostril. He couldn't say if it popped or if it had gone back up her nose. Upon hearing this and assessing what it could mean, Sean was released on bail while tests and experiments were conducted to ascertain as to whether the blood on his clothes had got onto him from being close to Billie Joe when she was being bludgeoned, or whether this bubble that had popped had caused some sort of mist spray that had settled on Sean rather than impact from spatter. It was suggested that Sean had gone back to his car and sat in his MG just so there would be an explanation as to potentially any blood in his car, which he had received from checking on Billie Joe as opposed to bludgeoning her. As it turned out, there was a very tiny smudge of what appeared to be blood in the car, but it couldn't be conclusively proved to be blood and was removed totally during the testing process. When the house was searched after the body was removed, the police made a discovery about the house. Despite Sean saying that he had gone to do it all to get white spirit, there was a half-full bottle of white spirit already in the house. In his interview with Sir Trevor MacDonald, Sean claimed that he did not know it was there and wouldn't have seen it if he had looked. That is something that was brought up by the police, but it is not unusual for people to forget they have domestic or cleaning supplies. I've done it. And you buy something years ago, totally forget that you've got it, and then realize years later you need it and you go and buy it. Yet the police said that it was actually easily accessible. Plus, how would Sean have known it was a 3-year-old bottle? But it does beg the following questions. Why didn't Sean buy white spirit at the same time as buying the paint? Why didn't Sean cover the windows of the patio doors or put something on the floor to cover the tiles? Telling Billie Joe not to get paint on the glass or tiles does not mean that she won't. Either he thought telling her would be enough, which is unrealistic, or he knew he had white spirit and therefore didn't need to buy any more when he bought the paint, and that's why he didn't take measures to protect the glass or tiles, because he knew he could easily remove the paint. And also, he didn't need to get white spirit or use white spirit for Annie to take over the painting, because it's easier to remove all the paint on the tiles or the glass that both girls would have got onto them, as opposed to just removing it after Billie and then removing it as Annie went. In the Channel 5 documentary, one of the officers said that there was a painting and decorating shop at the top of 40 at Lower Park Road, so why didn't he go there? Also on the patio was something else that was suspect. A bucket of soapy water, and it was quite low, not a lot of water in there. But why was it there? This was one of the buckets used by Annie when she was washing the opal. Why would this have been placed there after discovering Billie Joe? It wasn't put there by police. Surely all buckets had been moved back into the house and emptied before Sean had taken Annie to pick up Lottie. Why was it placed on the patio still half full? Was it used to clean up any blood? In his book, Sean dismisses this as saying it's ridiculous for people to take the bizarre appearance of a bucket of water as being proof of him being the murderer. Sean did say that he got some of Billie Joe's blood on his hands when he was tending to her and he washed it off. So it could be that this was an explanation for any blood present in the water and how that got inside the bucket, but surely he'd have used the sink. Did they find any blood in the sink? Annie and Lottie said that their father did not have any visible blood on him when he went back out to the MG when they were waiting after Lottie had deposited a clarinet back in the house. They said that they were waiting for a minute or two, and it was theorized that Sean had murdered Billy Joe during this very small window of opportunity. Surely this was not enough time, and as he had no visible blood on him, with no time to wash any off, which would have surely been all over him including his clothes, and he would have had to have changed them, how could Sean have been the murderer? His roundabout trip could also be explained. If you look at Lower Park Road on Google Earth, you can see that it is not straight, it curves, and not very wide. If you can't see around a bend long enough to do a 3-point turn, it is understandable that he went round the block when going the other way. Sean Jenkins said that this was commonplace for him and not something he did only on that day. He also went in the direction that the car was facing, even if he had to go the other way. This was out of safety for the children, but also himself. Deciding to come home a minute or two after departing could easily be plausible, because people can change their minds halfway through a car journey. He changed it again when he said that Annie was desperate to paint. Some internet sleuths have said that it would have been unusual for a 12-year-old to be very desperate to paint that evening, especially as it would have got dark quite quickly. Yet I remember being that age and I loved painting at home with my mum, as doing a job that grown-ups did made me feel grown up. Sean pressed on with his journey to do it all because of Annie wanted to paint. This seems unfair, and blaming Annie for having been out of the house for longer than needed for someone to murder Billy Joe. Sean also pointed out to Sir Trevor McDonald that the notion of him going round the park twice to buy time was ludicrous, because he could have wasted more time going around the shop. That's a very fair point, because cameras in the shop and store workers as well as other customers would have placed him and the girls in the store together. Yet when he discovered he had no money, he had no reason to go into the shop further. Going back to Pat Brown's video, now she made a very good point in her video. She proposed the theory that Billy Joe was not killed between the time of Lottie being dropped off and them going back out to buy White Spirit. That's too short a time as well. And given that Sean had mentioned half an hour to 45 minutes to the dispatcher, it's likely that Billy Joe was killed before they even went to collect Lottie. Sean blamed shock and confusion as to why he gave that time scale rather than the 10 to 15 minutes it had been. Yet there's a large difference between 10 to 15 minutes and 30 to 45 minutes. Pat Brown also proposed an explanation as to why Sean didn't get any excess blood on him, and I'd recommend you watch her video for the reasons for those 2 points. A year later, Sean's trial commenced, and forensic scientists called by both prosecution and defense gave very contradictory statement as to how the 158 individual spots of blood on Sean Jenkins' clothing arrived. Both agreed, though, that this was not impact spatter, but a fine spray that gave rise to these spots, or was consistent with having been deposited by a fine spray. It's like a cloud. There was also no back spatter, which would have been caused by a weapon with blood on it being swung back in order to be brought back down upon the victim. So it would have been over the back, being dripped off the weapon, but there was none on Sean. Sean said that the blood on his clothing came from when he tried to render aid to Billy Joe, but strangely, none of the paramedics nor Denise had any blood on them. No fine spray, nor any spatter or spots of blood. So why only on Sean? The defense said that the blood must have gotten onto Sean's clothing when she breathed out on him. So this was expiration spray, or when he moved her. Some air in her lungs, or any trapped air in her lungs, would have expelled as he moved her, creating a very fine mist, not visible to the naked eye. So he wouldn't have known that this had gone on him. A pediatrician called this impossible, and a pathologist verified this by saying that she would not have been able to breathe, given that her injuries would have killed her instantaneously or within minutes. The pathologist confirmed that Billy Joe would have needed to have inhaled 2.2 litres of air to be able to exhale enough for the blood to have spattered in the way that it did, and said it was, quote, extremely unlikely. This was also verified by Denise Lancaster, saying that Billy Joe wasn't breathing. Notably, in the 999 call, Sean said he did not know if Billy Joe was breathing, as he hadn't looked. He hadn't checked to see if his foster daughter was alive as she lay on the floor or bloody. After hearing all the evidence, the jury retired to consider its verdict. The judge had said that even a majority verdict, so 10 out of 12, would have been enough, but in this case it was a unanimous decision. Guilty. Sean Jenkins was convicted of the murder of his foster daughter Billie Jo Jenkins on the 2nd of July 1998 and sentenced to life in prison. Billie Jo's murder was so brutal and violent that the judge deemed Sean Jenkins to be a danger to society. One more thing that was interesting about Sean was that when he was arrested, a background check was done on him, and it turned out that he had lied on his CV when applying for the deputy head teacher position at William Parker School. He claimed to have gone to universities and places that he hadn't. He claimed to have received grades that he hadn't. And he used the same information to apply for the head teacher's role at the same place that he was due to take over a few months later. That particular charge of deception is still on file. He hasn't been convicted of that. I don't know whether he ever will. Sean Jenkins said in his book, "Many people must have embellished their CVs. Does that make them a murderer?" Putting the blame onto society as a whole for falsifying information when applying for a job when they can easily do background checks, which they didn't do, that's extremely brazen, really, really bold-faced, cocky. Some people do lie on their CVs, but that doesn't mean that it's right. That doesn't mean that it's normal. So this charge was called obtaining pecuniary advantage by deception. So the charge is still on file. In 1999, Sean Jenkins appealed his murder conviction, reiterating that the blood on his clothes got there by Billie Jo breathing out either as he moved her or when he went back to her after Denise had pulled the plastic from Billie Jo's nose. Denise said that the blood flowed from Billie Jo's nose once she did this. It didn't spurt, spray, or there was no exhalation that she could see. So this indicated that the plastic was plugging blood as opposed to her nose actively pumping blood. The appeal judge dismissed Sean's appeal and said that if Billie Jo had indeed been breathing, there's no way that this fine mist would have been as high on his person as Sean's clothing, because it went right from the top of his jacket all the way down to his shoes. Lois Jenkins did not stand by her husband, fully believing him to be guilty of the murder of Billie Jo. She and their 4 daughters moved to Australia, and she and Sean Jenkins later divorced. He has not had close contact with his daughters ever since. Whilst in prison, Sean consulted with Bob Wolfenden, an investigative journalist who believed Sean Jenkins to have been innocent, and together they wrote the book The Murder of Billie Jo. After appealing to the CCRC, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, they reviewed the 1999 appeal, and the information supplied by the defense expert witness about the blood stains being caused by expiration spray. They said that gases had built up and the breath out could have been post-mortem, as air can get trapped in the lungs and then expelled when the body is moved. The CCRC accepted the appeal in 2004, and the conviction was quashed, with a retrial being ordered. Sean was released on bail, at which point he had remarried and went to live with his new wife Tina. The retrial took place in 2005, but the jury couldn't reach a majority verdict after 39 hours of deliberation, so a second retrial was ordered. At this retrial, it was stated by the judge that the whole case centered really mainly, there was lots of circumstantial evidence, but the main crux was the blood spatter and whether this blood came to be on Sean Jenkins' clothing from him killing her, or if by expiration when he tended to her. As with the first retrial, the jury could not come to a conclusion because the prosecution and the defense were giving very conflicting accounts, and I've read the court documents and really there's no way to determine as to what it could be. Therefore, the judge at the Old Bailey formally acquitted Sean Jenkins and he was released despite not being found not guilty by a jury. His conviction was quashed basically on a jury failing to reach a verdict. Usually when someone has been acquitted, they can apply to the Home Office for compensation due to them being wrongfully imprisoned to the maximum of £500,000 or £1 million if they have spent a decade or more in prison. So Sean would have been eligible for a maximum of £500,000. Whether they are successful is another matter, as not all people that have their convictions quashed or are pardoned are entitled to compensation. When someone is tried for a crime, the burden of proof lies with the prosecution to show that the appellant committed the crime beyond all reasonable doubt. It is not necessary for the defense to prove their client to be innocent although they may well do this if they find it. If evidence is heard in court that proves someone to be innocent, even before a verdict is reached, the judge can actually throw the case out. But if a verdict is reached based on evidence provided, and the jury does not feel that the prosecution has met its burden of proof, or if the defense has successfully rebutted the evidence presented by the prosecution, the jury will find the appellant not guilty. Not guilty is not the same as being innocent. The legal system does not and cannot declare someone as being innocent. Being not guilty legally does not mean that the person did not carry out the act, but rather that there's not enough proof to confirm that they did. Therefore, the default position is not guilty. However, when it comes to compensation, this is when the acquitted person must be able to prove their innocence, because the government understands that someone is declared not guilty of a crime doesn't mean that they're innocent. So why would they compensate them just because they're found not guilty? At the time of Sean Jenkins' acquittal, there were two compensation schemes, discretionary and statutory. A year after his acquittal, the former was abolished, leaving only statutory. Quoting from commonslibrary.parliament.uk, the statutory scheme gives the Justice Secretary discretion to pay compensation to a wrongly convicted person, quote, when his conviction has been reversed or he has been pardoned on the ground that a new or newly discovered fact shows beyond reasonable doubt that there has been a miscarriage of justice. In the years since, there has been discussion and debate in Parliament as to what the meaning of miscarriage of justice means. Since March 2014, it has been defined as the following: if and only if the new or newly discovered fact shows beyond reasonable doubt that the person did not commit the offence. In Sean Jenkins' case, he was not proved to have been not guilty of the crime of the murder of Billie Joe Jenkins beyond all reasonable doubt, and could not conclusively demonstrate his innocence. Despite Sean Jenkins saying to the press, "I fulfill all the criteria," he didn't, and he was refused compensation on the basis that he had not demonstrated his innocence. It is clear that many people do not understand these legal technicalities, thinking that not guilty means innocent, with one Sean Jenkins reporter saying, quote, "In what universe does not guilty mean not innocent? Not guilty is a legal status, but does not mean the person did not commit the deed. Sean Jenkins may well be innocent, but there may not be any evidence to prove that. Given he now has the same legal status of someone who has been found not guilty, we cannot say that he is guilty." I'm just going to go back to the very first video I ever did on this channel, which was the murder of Leslie Susan Moldseed. The person who was convicted of her murder, Stefan Kishko, he was innocent, and he was able to demonstrate his innocence using medical and forensic evidence, and he was provided with compensation. But that's not the case for Sean. Sean said that he wasn't going to appeal the decision, and has since stated that he will not rest until he finds out who killed his foster daughter. What is interesting though is that after his acquittal, Sean Jenkins gave new information, or was it only made public after his acquittal? He said that he saw someone standing in the hallway of the home after calling the ambulance, whom he thought was a plain-clothed police officer. But this person wasn't a police officer and was never identified. Sean Jenkins said in his book, published in 2008, that this person was a, quote, well-dressed and articulate man. Sean says that he believed this person was likely Billie Joe's murderer. Denise, who came round after Sean called her, said that she didn't think that this man existed, and she hasn't said that she saw any such person. Bill Jenkins, Billie Joe's natural father, was understandably very distraught over Sean's acquittal, and he has since died of cancer. One of Billie Joe's natural sisters, Margaret, has since said that she wished she had died instead of Billie Joe. When Sean Jenkins addressed the press after his acquittal, some members of Billie Joe's natural family attacked Sean, saying they would do it again if they could, as they believed him to be guilty. Her family also said they would file a suit against him, saying that the forensic evidence also showed pieces of bone, flesh and chromium from the tent peg on his clothes, which they also believe to prove his guilt. I don't know how true that is, but I don't think there's been any more development since then. In January 2022, Sussex Police announced that it was reviewing the forensic evidence, but as of yet, no new information has come forward. I don't think they are exploring new avenues, but they're just reviewing the forensic evidence. I do have my opinions on this case and on Sean Jenkins, but will not be voicing them here. I do invite healthy debate in the comments, but please be be sensitive to Billy Joe's natural and foster families. And also bear in mind that Sean is not a convicted person right now. Please also be constructive and kind and polite to each other and critique the comment as opposed to the person. Thank you very much for watching this, little berries and newberries. I really appreciate it. And just to reiterate, if you want to join the channel, £2.99 a month, and you get early access to all my videos and extra content, or you can join Patreon, or just subscribing is absolutely free. It takes a click of a button and it's right there on your list, and you can just come back whenever you want. But I hope you are all well wherever you are and wish you all the best. Thank you very much. Bye bye.